Retiring at 50, 60, and 70 isn't just the same life starting at different times. They are three fundamentally different experiences, requiring three different financial engines. Most people picture retirement as a single finish line. You save the number, you stop the work, and you settle into some permanent state of leisure. But the reality of life at 50 looks nothing like life at 70. And planning as if they're the same life is where most retirement strategies quietly break down. But here's the tension that most financial calculators miss entirely. It's not about how much you save. It's about which version of retirement you're actually building for, and whether your plan accounts for all three chapters or just one of them. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your 60s might be the most expensive decade of your entire retirement, and why the first 5 years after you stop working matter more than the next 20 combined. Anna, you might recognize yourself in one of these windows right now. Maybe you're in your early 50s, sitting on a strong savings rate, wondering if the math is close enough to make a move. The energy is there, the uncertainty is louder, or you're approaching 65, and the math is mostly figured out, but you're struggling to visualize what Tuesday morning actually looks like when there's nothing scheduled, no meeting, no obligation, just time. Or you're already in it, recently retired, and realizing that the version of retirement you planned for doesn't quite match what you're experiencing. The recalibration is quiet, but it's real. The problem in all three cases is the same. Most retirement plans treat spending as a flat line, a fixed amount, adjusted slightly for inflation, running steadily across 30 years. That's not what retirement actually looks like. Real spending across a retirement doesn't follow a clean downward slope, and it follows something closer to a curve. And understanding the shape of that curve changes how you plan for all of it. The model that actually reflects retirement behavior isn't a straight line. It's three distinct chapters. The first is the active phase. This is the chapter most people picture when they imagine retirement. High energy, high curiosity, a meaningful shift in how time gets used. Travel spending increases. Experience-based spending increases. There's a psychological momentum to early retirement that tends to drive discretionary costs upward, not downward. If you retire at 50, this phase could run for a decade or longer. If you retire at 65, it might be 5 to 8 years. The length varies significantly. The behavioral pattern doesn't change much. The second is the settled phase. This is the chapter that most financial plans underestimate. The pace slows, priorities shift, but spending doesn't simply drop alongside them. Healthcare costs start appearing more consistently. Home-related expenses evolve, and psychologically, this tends to be the phase where retirees make their most significant financial decisions. Larger purchases, gifts to family, expenditures that feel manageable in the moment but carry long-term weight. The third is the stability phase. Discretionary spending typically does decrease here. Travel becomes less frequent. Lifestyle needs simplify in genuine ways. But what replaces discretionary spending isn't nothing. It's healthcare. The costs that were a moderate line item in the settled phase become a primary variable in the stability phase. Here is the disruption worth sitting with. Most people assume spending naturally decreases every year they're retired. They picture needing the most money early and the least money late. The data across real retirements doesn't support that assumption cleanly. What it actually looks like for many retirees is a curve that rises in the early years, plateaus, or even peaks, somewhere in the middle, and then shifts in composition rather than simply declining. Less discretionary, more health care. The total doesn't always fall as fast as expected. Your retirement at 60 may be the most expensive decade of your life, not because of recklessness, because it sits at the intersection of high capability and rising costs. And most plans don't account for both happening at the same time. Now apply this to the three retirement ages directly. Retiring at 50 is an exercise in freedom, but also in a specific kind of discipline that doesn't get enough attention. You have a 30 to 40-year gap to bridge. That's not a minor planning detail. It changes the entire architecture of how a withdrawal strategy needs to be built. And it introduces a behavioral pattern worth naming: activity creep. When every day is a Saturday, every day has the potential to cost like a Saturday. And the early years of a 50-year-old retirement are often marked by high discretionary spending that's both understandable and financially significant. Travel, experiences, the decompression of years of deferred living. None of that is irrational, but it's happening at exactly the point where the portfolio is most vulnerable to early drawdowns, which connects directly to the risk we'll get to shortly. The investment horizon is also still long at 50. That creates genuine growth potential. But it also means longer exposure to market cycles and a narrower margin for error in the early years. Retiring at 50 doesn't just mean more retirement. It means a retirement structure that demands more precision, specifically in how the early years are managed. Retiring at 60 tends to carry the most balanced starting conditions. Energy is still meaningful. Healthcare costs haven't yet become dominant. Social Security and pension timelines are closer. And the retirement window, typically 25 to 30 years, is long enough to require serious longevity planning, but short enough that the math is more tractable. The tension at 60 isn't the same as the tension at 50. It's not, will I run out of time? It's, am I accounting for how expensive the next decade is likely to be? Because the 60s are frequently the most active spending decade of retirement. The lifestyle is still highly capable. The psychological novelty of available time is still fresh. And decisions made in this window, about travel, about property, about how much to give away, compound forward in ways that affect the settled and stability phases significantly. This is the decade most financial plans quietly underestimate. Retiring at 70 shifts the structure again. The active phase is shorter. Discretionary spending simplifies more quickly. The math, in some ways, is more forgiving. A shorter horizon means less exposure to long-term compounding risk. But the healthcare variable becomes central rather than peripheral. And the concept of sustained flexibility that defines a 50-year retirement is largely replaced by something else: secured stability. The goal at 70 is less about maximizing the runway and more about protecting the quality of what remains on it. There's also a dimension here that doesn't appear on any spreadsheet. Retiring at 70 sometimes carries a different relationship with time than retiring at 50. And what matters most has often already been clarified by experience. The financial questions are real, but they're nested inside a different psychological context than early retirement. Here's the layer that gets skipped most often. 3 risks run across the retirement timeline, but they don't apply equally to all 3 ages. Longevity risk, sequence of returns risk, healthcare variability. The sequence risk is the one worth understanding carefully because it's the most counterintuitive. And if you retire at 50 and the market experiences a significant downturn in your first 3 to 5 years, and you're drawing down to fund an active lifestyle simultaneously, you're selling assets at a discount, and you're doing it at the precise moment when the portfolio has the most years ahead of it. The compounding that would have worked in your favor over 40 years now has less to work with. This is the hidden fragility of early retirement. The first 5 years don't just set the tone psychologically, they establish the portfolio's structural trajectory. A strong early sequence creates a cushion that protects the later phases. A poor early sequence creates a deficit that doesn't just persist, it shapes decisions for years afterward. Retiring early increases time risk, the danger of a long runway with compounding volatility exposure. Retiring late shifts the dominant risk toward health, not the danger of running out of money, but the danger of outliving your ability to use it on your own terms. The retirement age you choose doesn't just determine how many years you have, it determines which risks become your primary variables. This is where the planning frame has to shift. Most retirement thinking centers on a target number. Reach the number, retire. The number becomes the finish line, and everything before it is preparation, and everything after it is supposed to be settled. But the number isn't actually what you're planning. You're planning a timeline structure. 3 chapters, each with its own financial logic, its own lifestyle profile, its own risk exposure. The more useful question isn't, do I have enough? It's, how many years of each phase will I likely experience? And does my plan actually reflect that distribution? A 50-year-old retiree might spend 15 years in active retirement, 10 in settled, and 10 in stability. And that's a specific architecture with specific spending implications at each stage. A 65-year-old retiree might have 8 years of active, 8 of settled, 8 of stability. Different architecture, different risk profile, different demands on the same type of portfolio. Neither is better or worse. They're different structures. And they require different thinking, not just different numbers. Financial independence isn't about escaping work. It's about designing time. Designing time means understanding which phases you're building for. Not just the total length of the runway, but the shape of it. Where the spending peaks. Where the risks shift. Where the decisions made in year 3 have consequences in year 23. If you're planning for one flat lifestyle across 30 years, you're not planning for retirement. You're planning for a version of retirement that doesn't reflect how it actually unfolds. The age you retire shapes the retirement you experience, not just how long it lasts, how it feels, what it costs, which risks you carry, which trade-offs you live with. If there's one thing worth taking from this, it's that the 3 chapters aren't a theory. They're a behavioral pattern that shows up consistently across retirement data. Spending rises before it falls. Healthcare replaces discretionary. The early years matter more than the later years for portfolio health. Plan for 3 lifestyles, not one. Which phase carries the most uncertainty in your current thinking? That's usually where the plan needs the most attention. Not the target number, the structure behind it.